The fantasy football season has just been beating us up all year long, and now we have 6 teams on bye. No Josh Allen or Joe Burrow. Who's going to be up inside the top 20 quarterbacks in Week 12? What is going on, Headliner Nation? Hopefully everyone is doing well out there today. As you can tell, no. I'm not at home, I'm not in my office. I'm out here in Arizona helping my family with some of the things that we're going through right now, but that does not mean that we do not make fantasy football rankings videos. So let's go ahead and do just that. Let's dive into Week 12, but before we do, let's see what some of my bigger hits and misses were from Week 11. Now, when it comes to the hits at the quarterback position, we got the likes of Joe Burrow, Bo Nix, and Matthew Stafford. For Burrow, I had him up inside Tier 1 last week, and he finished as the quarterback 2. He produced. How about Bo Nix? I had him all the way up inside the top 10, finished inside the top 10, and then Matthew Stafford. Despite having a bad Week 10 game, I kept him up inside the top 12, and he finished with 27 freaking fantasy points. How about some of my bigger misses, though? One's got to be Jared Goff. You just really don't know what to expect from the Detroit offense each week. Are they going to be run heavy? Are they going to be pass heavy? I expected them to have a lead in that game last week. Not that big of a lead, but even so, I would have expected a lot more running, a lot less passing. Jared Goff had himself a huge week, though. I missed on Jared Goff, had him ranked too low. Russell Wilson had him ranked way too high. I gotta love how a guy who's averaging just under 20 fantasy points a game gets a great matchup and then absolutely comes out and sucks it up in our fantasy lineups. I had him ranked way too high, as well as Jaden Daniels. For the first time in a long time, he looked overwhelmed and played like a true rookie. But now it's time to move into Week 12. Let's bring up Tier 1 for the quarterback position. Now for Jalen Hurts, he's going up against the Rams, and the rushing touchdowns are really helping him here as of late, especially when he has a down passing game like we saw just last week. He's got 9 rushing touchdowns over the last 5 games, and the Rams allow over 16.5 fantasy points per contest, so Jalen Hurts is at number 1. Number 2 is Lamar Jackson going up against the Chargers, and Lamar has just been killing it with his arm this year. He's only had 1 game over the last 5 where he's had at least 50 yards rushing. Now this matchup is a little bit easier than what Lamar had to deal with last week, but the Chargers do allow right around 16.5 fantasy points per game, so Lamar Jackson's at number 2. Number 3 is Justin Herbert going up against those Baltimore Ravens, and he's one of the hottest fantasy quarterbacks right now in the league. Over the last month, he's the quarterback 6 overall, and really benefiting from the usage of his legs. He's had at least 50 yards rushing or a rushing touchdown in 3 of the last 4 games, and the Baltimore Ravens allow the 3rd most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. Then we got Jaden Daniels going up against Dallas, and that was freaking ugly last week from Jaden Daniels. Actually really kind of been struggling over the last month of the season compared to how fast he started. But let's not kid ourselves. It's been some tough matchups here as of late, going against teams like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Chicago. Now a matchup going up against Dallas. They allow the 5th most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, so Jaden Daniels at number 4. Number 5 is Patrick Mahomes going up against the Carolina Panthers, and he has been so much better since acquiring DeAndre Hopkins. 7 passing touchdowns over the last 3 weeks. Now, there is a chance that Isaiah Pacheco could be returning soon. But with the pass-catching weapons of Travis Kelce, DeAndre Hopkins, and now Juju Smith-Schuster, that's more than enough for Patrick Mahomes to have a great day against a lesser opponent because the Carolina Panthers allow the 7th most fantasy points per contest to the quarterback position. How about Bo Nix going up against Las Vegas? And he may be the hottest fantasy quarterback as of right now. Over the last month, the only quarterbacks in the league who have scored more fantasy points than Bo Nix are Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, and Lamar Jackson. Now, as of late, Bo Nix hasn't been running as much, but in a matchup going up against Las Vegas, they allow the 8th most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, so Bo Nix up inside Tier 1. And then lastly, Jared Goff going up against the Colts. Now, I haven't dove into this deep enough to really find out for sure, but is it just me, or do you have to think that there aren't very many quarterbacks that have thrown for so many touchdowns in such few pass attempts? He's averaging only 23 pass attempts a game over the last 8 weeks, however, has 19 passing touchdowns over that span. Now a matchup going up against Indianapolis, who allows the 9th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. You gotta think that the Jared Goff ceiling could be there once again in Week 12. So now let's move down to Tier 2, where we got Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Geno Smith, Brock Purdy, Tua Tagovailoa, CJ Stroud, and Jordan Love. Now for Baker Mayfield, he's going up against the Giants. He's coming off the bye week, and does he have Mike Evans back at his disposal this week? That's something we're paying close attention to, because Baker Mayfield has been absolutely balling even without his stud wide receivers. Now, if he can get one of those studs back, you have to think he's going to continue to play well when it comes to fantasy football production. Going up against the Giants here this week, they allow the 12th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Then we got Kyler Murray going up against Seattle, another quarterback coming off the bye. Can Arizona stay hot? Because Kyler has scored 20 plus fantasy points now in 3 of his last 4 games. Really been up and down a lot this season, but with the rushing upside he possesses and the current matchup, he's got to be a low-end quarterback one this week. Seattle allows just over 17 fantasy points per game, so Kyler Murray is at number 9. Number 10 is his opponent in that game, Geno Smith. And really the biggest question here is which Arizona defense decides to show up. They have been playing great over the last month of the season. Geno is really starting to get Jackson Smith and Jigba going a little bit more, and we know DK Metcalf is now closer to 100% health. Now, there are very few teams in the NFL that can really limit DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith and Jigba at the same time. The Cardinals, they allow right around 16 fantasy points per game, so I got Geno Smith inside the top 10 at number 10. Number 11 is Brock Do-'em Dirty Purdy going up against the Green Bay Packers, and he's currently dealing with a right shoulder injury that has him day-to-day as of right now. Now, it sounds like George Kittle should be back and able to return this week, but this is not a great matchup. Green Bay allows the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, but really, this comes down to health. If Brock Purdy is a full go heading into the weekend, along with George Kittle, it's really hard to count out this offense against anybody, so he's a low-end QB1 as of right now at quarterback 11. Then we got Tua Tagovailoa going up against the New England Patriots. Finally, Tua had himself a ceiling game in week 11. The way this offense is starting to utilize Jonnu Smith at the tight end position, a lot more is really opening up down the field. Now, Miami, they can't afford to lose any more games, especially a divisional game at this point. Going up against the Patriots, who allow under 16 fantasy points per game, I got Tua Tagovailoa at number 12. 13 is CJ Stroud going up against Tennessee, and most people are about fed up with CJ Stroud at this point. 5 straight weeks of below average performances. Now, it does help that Nico Collins is back, but he played in less than 50% of the snaps just last week. You got to pay attention to that. You have to think in his second game back, he's going to be on the field a little bit more, and Tennessee allows right around the league average in fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Then, to round out tier 2, we got Jordan Love going up against San Francisco, and if not for a rushing touchdown last week, he would have been a huge disappointment. Has really struggled in tough matchups here as of late, going up against the likes of Detroit and Chicago, who are both top 5 defenses against quarterbacks. But now he gets a matchup going up against San Francisco, who allows the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. Not a lot of great matchups here as of late for Jordan Love, but with all the weapons he has in this offense, he has to at least be a high-end QB2. Which only leaves us tier 3, where we have Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford, Anthony Richardson, Sam Darnold, Drake May, and Jameis Winston. Now, Russell Wilson, he's going up against Cleveland, and you gotta love how a quarterback who is averaging just under 20 fantasy points per game, who had a great matchup last week going up against Baltimore, comes out and totally craps the bed like Russell Wilson did. That was his first game since becoming the starter in Pittsburgh without a touchdown, but now he gets a matchup going up against Cleveland, who allows just under 17 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. How about Matthew Stafford? He's going up against Philadelphia, and he's had at least 275 yards passing in every single game since the return of Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. He's got 10 touchdowns over the last 4 games, and LA's going to have to try to find success through the air against this Philadelphia defense. However, Philly allows the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, and they made Jaden Daniels look absolutely silly last week. Then we go down to Anthony Richardson going up against Detroit, the Taysom Hill of the quarterback position. He's going to be a weekly boomer bust play. That's just what he is. And he's going to be reliant on the rushing production, because without it, he's barely a verge top 20 fantasy quarterback. Now a tough matchup going up against Detroit. They allow the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. Then we got Sam Darnold going up against Chicago. It was great to see Sam Darnold bounce back from whatever the hell that was in week 10. But now he's going up against Chicago, who allows the fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks in the entire NFL. This isn't some smash start, but when you have the likes of Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson, he has that chance for a couple touchdowns every single week. This week, just a lot more risk. Then we go down to Drake May going up against Miami, and we love to see the passing volume here as of late. 40 plus pass attempts in 2 of his last 3. The problem is, they're not going very far down the field. He's had at least 29 completions in 2 of the last 3 games, but doesn't have over 300 yards passing in either one of them. Now he gets to go up against Miami, who allows the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. It's going to be a tough matchup for Drake May, but the volume is there to keep him in that mid QB2 talk. And then we round out here tier 3 with Jameis Winston going up against Pittsburgh. Now Elijah Moore and David Njoku are currently questionable to play, so that's definitely something we need to pay attention to here. Pittsburgh allows the second fewest fantasy points per game to the quarterback position, so this matchup is not great. But with how much Cleveland is throwing the ball, you have to think that Jameis Winston has a higher upside than a lot of other quarterbacks beneath him here in the rankings. So there you have my top 20 quarterbacks here for Week 12 fantasy football. We're going to have to be patient with our fantasy teams here over the next coming weeks. A ton of bye weeks coming up. We got the Thanksgiving holiday as well, and it's going to wreak havoc in fantasy football leagues. Now, if you enjoyed today's show, do me a favor, hit the like button if you haven't already. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here today. Hopefully you enjoy the rest of your day, and then most importantly, do your part to make the world a better place.
Analytics off the chain, all the channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headline Nation, we running the game.